This is Community Conversations here on KSUN 103.5 FM, WLSP LP in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. And I am John Quinlan, your host. In just a moment, we're going to be having a discussion with our two distinguished guests from United Against Hate. Got an interesting show ahead of you, and again, we're going to be talking about the issues of hate, white supremacism, other phenomena that are playing out in this country, and I can't think of two better gentlemen to have this discussion with, and that is Masood Akhtar and Nino Amato, and they are with an organization called United Against Hate. Hey, welcome to Community Conversations.
Yeah, thanks, John. Appreciate it.
John.
Good to have you here.
It's under these circumstances.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the circumstances. I guess get right at the events of this weekend in El Paso and in Dayton. What's playing out there? How is that having an impact on the local level, Masood?
Well, it's quite a bit. People are very concerned about what they are seeing, because anything that happens nationally, internationally affects people living in Wisconsin. If you look at just even as of now this year, over 250 shootings that took place right here in this country.
Those are mass shootings at the level, I think, four shootings.
Absolutely. And recently, all of this, over 30 people, innocent people, were just killed. The question that everybody's asking, and particularly from the Muslim community that we are asking, is that who was the shooter? Was that shooter from ISIS ideology, Al-Qaeda ideology? Were those from those countries that have been banned? Okay. Were those immigrants, refugees, you name it, right? And the answer is resounding no.
This is an event that's a lot more resonant with Timothy McVeigh in Oklahoma City.
People
homegrown.
Right here, homegrown, and we call them as domestic terrorism.
And Americans have a far greater chance, almost 100 to 1, to be killed by a domestic terrorist, American-born domestic terrorist, than they do by Al-Qaeda or somebody abroad. I mean, and when you ask about how people are reacting, first he being the president, Donald Trump, who, as far as I'm concerned, is an illegitimate president in light of what we know, attacked the Muslims. Then he attacked the Mexicans. Then he attacked and called every African-American country, quote, shit countries. And the point is that he's systematically, hatefully going after every community that he disagrees with. And what's tragic is children are frightened. There's children that are frightened who are Hispanic in the schools or Muslim in the schools. People of color are scared. This is really serious. And in last year alone, the FBI was investigating over 850 cases of domestic terrorism. And if you look at Poway, synagogue shooting, and so on and so forth, it's just one thing after another. And this is beginning to snowball. And what it is that you have a Republican Party who, by and large, is remaining silent, aren't condemning what's really going on, and you also have to follow the money. And it all gets back down to, do guns kill people? Well, when we draft people in the military like they did when Vietnam was on, or they have a volunteer army, they give guns to the military to kill people. So guns do kill people. And we can't even get background checks, we can't even get a red flag, we can't even get anything passed through Congress. And why? Follow the money. Mitch McConnell received over $1 million of money through the NRA. Senator Graham has received like $800,000 from the NRA. So you have this constant influx, and this should not be a partisan issue whatsoever. Several Republicans have stepped forward and are asking for background checks and red flag laws, which would give the police the authority to go in through due process and take weapons away if there is really an mentally, emotionally unstable individual. So we have a crisis in this country, and it's the same kind of crisis that we've seen historically. This administration is using fear, and by inciting right-wing terrorists who cite the president on their websites, there is a connection. He may not be directly guilty, but Donald Trump has blood on his hands.
Well, there's a resonance with the language of the so-called manifesto that the El Paso
invasion.
Shooter, right?
Yeah, they use the same words.
Invasion.
Infestations use the same words. And historically, you can see time and time again, this is what fascists and communists use. They use things to demean individuals as human beings and try to turn them into insects, or that they're somehow evil and you're being threatened. And here you've got these young minds who, in fact, buy into this, and then they take action.
Now, by some notions, there was a brief moment in the president's statement on Monday morning of showing some level of responsibility, some level of empathy for the victims, other things. But notably, one of the pieces of language there was essentially trying to invoke the notion of video games, people with mental illness, and then that same sentence say it's people like this that kill, not guns. Is that
it's a talking point
and
from
is
the
that
NRA.
coming directly from the NRA?
It's coming directly.
Yeah.
Everything that comes back on video games and this thing. Now, listen, I don't really buy into the violent video games, and I'm sure there's some correlations where they can say it numbs people's sense about what killing's all about.
As do movies and other mass media.
Movies. But the fact of the matter is, that is not what happened. That was an SR-15 semi-automatic rifle with a 100-round cartridge that was used in the Dayton, Ohio shooting. And it was also an SR-15 that was used in the El Paso shooting.
And in Dayton, had they not confronted the assailant immediately, it could have been hundreds of people.
Hundreds of
who were
people
absolutely.
Dead. And here's the thing, too. We just learned that the mother of the shooter, white supremacist, in El Paso, she went to the police a month earlier saying, my son has this rifle. And they said, we can't take it away by law. If there was a red flag law that was as expansive as it is with due process like California has and 15 other states has, the police could have then said, all right, we're going to get a court order. We're going to give the opportunity to go through due process, determine whether or not we should take the gun away. And then if a court and a judge says, yes, take it away, it's taken away for 6 months, you come back and review it in 6 months. The same thing, too, is if you can give teachers the ability or a neighbor the ability to go to the police and say, I've seen this kid in the backyard using this weapon. And that was the case in one of the mass shootings. But there's no avenue that private citizen can do, or teachers or counselors or parents, to stop the type of purchasing of weapons and then using them. So that's when you see someone who brings a brand new SR-15 into the home, that's a red flag. So the question is, that's simple. Getting back to Donald Trump, he didn't meet with any of the victims. They didn't want to meet with them.
Yeah.
And when he got there, they showed a video that was leaked out talking about how great his last trip was to El Paso.
Yeah.
This man doesn't have he
was not welcome there.
Passionate.
No,
he does
wasn't.
not have a
Yeah.
compassionate or empathy whatsoever. It's all about this titanic, narcissistic personality.
Well, Masood, just to zero in on one of the
Yeah.
things you brought up initially, this difference between the way that we treat threats from abroad,
Yep.
which are generally, again, framed by this fear-mongering administration as
Yeah.
being rooted in Islamic communities, other immigrant communities. I think it's been out there that one of the reasons why it's difficult to deal with more domestic threats are the First Amendment, other constraints about being able to express on a website hatred, and yet obviously there are bounds to that. But I think it comes back to your initial point. The reason we treat domestic terrorism differently is because we can't as easily invoke it into this matrix of fear of the other.
I think the real challenge is, and I think we as Wisconsinites or even we as Americans should think about things very differently based on what we are seeing. The thing is that white supremacy is becoming an American ISIS. And if we don't stop it, it will become a global ISIS, and it's going to create a lot of problems. Think about this. Just a few months ago, FBI actually testified, the U.S. House of Representatives, where they did make a case that white supremacy is a significant and persistent threat to this country. In some cases, they said even more than Islamic State. And yet they said they're not able to prosecute this under the current laws that exist. So I think they are working very hard to bring these issues to our elected officials and say, look, we need to treat them the way we treat ISIS and Al Qaeda. Otherwise, we're going to run into all sorts of problems.
Absolutely. Well, let's relate this on a more basic level to the work that you're doing. And the full title, of course, of your organization is We Are Many United Against Hate. Of course, that implies the potential when we come together to speak out against these issues, when we break the silence together. But could you talk just for those who maybe aren't familiar with the organization about the genesis of the group and how that's played out here in Wisconsin?
Yeah, I think the group has grown significantly. And just as a reminder to your listener is that how this thing came about. I mean, we're all talking about Donald Trump election here, so I'm going to go
Right.
back to what happened in 2016 when I received a phone call from a TV station where they said, "Hey, Masood, can you come on my show? There is a discussion about creating a Muslim registry." So there is a discussion in the White House about creating a Muslim registry. What's your reaction to that? What's your community reaction to that? And my response was very similar. Hey, look, I came to this country from India over 35 years ago, and I gave up my citizenship over 25 years ago based on what this country offers. Singling out a minority based on religion is not what America is all about. So it's going to divide the country based on religion, and it's highly un-American, unconstitutional. So, but I like the idea of starting a registry that will bring people together, and that's where I announced that we're going to start a movement called Anti-Hate Registry at that time. Now we call that as We Are Many United Against Hate. And what we do through this, we have a diverse group of advisory board, including Nino, who is on that. He's the chair of the policy committee, and we focus on two areas basically, mainly education and also nonpartisan policies as well. So we're going to go out underground, talking to high school kids, talking to college kids and community events, and talking about the real life stories. And then we just launched our nonpartisan policy issues as well.
And you're being called on to intercede, to mediate in a number of issues that played out. The last time you were here, we were discussing the situation in Baraboo.
Yep.
Where, for those of you, our listeners who aren't familiar with what happened there, essentially a group of young people had posed for a senior class portrait, and many of them were raising fists in the air in the manner of Sieg Heil. And this played out all across the world in terms
Yep,
of the
it
reaction
did.
to it.
Yep.
But I think part of the reaction that you all had was to say, this is the kind of thing that identifies the need for education. That
Yep.
this is the kind of thing that's bubbling up in cities
Absolutely.
both large and small everywhere.
Absolutely.
But what was the reaction? I mean, what was your response in terms of the Baraboo community and what you did there?
Yeah, I think it was pretty alarming when we saw that, Nazi salute, all those kinds of things, as you said, became international. We immediately approached them, and we sat down with them and talked to all those people and said, look, we got to do something about this so that it doesn't happen again. And so we got there, we put together their plan in terms of educational activities, particularly we have a community event. We have Arno and Pardeep talking about their life and what happened, and then how they're promoting and working with them, and both of them on our advisory board as well. And next day we have several panelists talking about Holocaust, talking about all of those things related to a very specific area. But through our organization, we simply don't go and organize an event. Organizing event is engaging the community as a step number one. And then we actually go back and work with them, with their community people, with the school administrator, with teachers to figure this out. In fact, I was there yesterday. We established a community alliance talking about, hey, what's next and what needs to be done, and let's move forward what can be done with those. So that's the kind of activity that we do through educational programs.
And to engage people within the community, be part of the solution.
Yes.
I know in Baraboo there was a Jewish family, and a distinct minority in that community, but it was their articulation of what this meant for them and their family that was really powerful.
It was very powerful. Yep, definitely. I mean, I had several meetings with the administrator and everything. These people are pretty serious in terms of how to deal with this kind of situation. They're very optimistic that moving forward, they're going to make some significant changes.
See, and I think school districts really reached out to the organization and to Masood, because where else can they turn to? Okay, they're dealing with so many other issues. Where in education, it's like telling a teacher or an administrator to put out a fire with a cup full of water. Okay,
Right.
and so they have an issue. So they welcome Masood and the organization to begin to educate. Now you're doing it in Mount Horeb, you're doing it up in Oshkosh. I mean, and the demand is far greater than what we're being able to manage at the point, which right now we're looking at how do we build infrastructure to deal with the capacity, both on the education side and policy
And
side.
recently, the federal government, even FBI we're talking about, FBI is looking at, which organization they need to recognize the kind of work they're doing in this kind of hate, fear, and confusion environment that we have right now. So our organization was recognized by FBI, and we received a 2018 Director for Leadership Award to build an inclusive community as a model that we believe.
This is on the
one day-
national level.
This is
You
at the
went out to
national
Washington,
level.
D.C.
We received
Yeah.
the award, FBI
Congratulations.
Director. Thank you. And so as when the governor found out, he actually also recognized that and presented a certificate of achievement to our organization. So it's getting quite a bit of traction all over the place. And I'm getting phone calls from other states to say, hey, is there a possibility of starting chapter,
Yeah.
what you're trying to do? Because, we're all working together in this. And it's happening because people are still very concerned about what they're seeing.
Let's have an offline discussion, by the way, about capacity building. That's part of what I do. I do that in other organizations. So I have some good ideas for
All right,
how
we'll
you
do
take
that.
it at this stage.
But again,
I just
getting-
wanted to emphasize, I had lunch with Neil Heinen the other day, and another example of someone in our community who really values what you're doing, and he's also helped to get the word out about
Yes,
what you're doing.
he's
Yep.
really a part. This is one thing that people ask all the time when we get phone call from other states. How do you get media engaged into this? Because
Sure.
every time you're doing it, media is with you and promoting all the good things that you guys are doing. So that's a very unique opportunity for us, just like the way you're doing it here.
Okay, well, give you a few ideas about the bigger picture of that, too. So go ahead, Nino.
No, I was just going to add, Masood's very, very modest, because when he organized this event at the Monona Terrace the day after Trump was sworn into office, no one had any idea how many people were going to show up.
Yeah.
But there was a general sense that something went wrong, and there was too much hate that's being delivered from the presidential campaigns that occurred that year. And I think it's fair to say that between 2,500 and 3,000 people spontaneously showed up for that event. That then led to the organization today. And so people want to reach out. So just like the one vocal Jewish family in Baraboo, to Neil Heinen, to Masood, who gets an idea and brings people together, one individual with many others can make a huge difference.
But it is a challenge at this juncture because you have so much energy, momentum that you have to harness, you have to focus. You can't just show up and then expect everything to kind of happen. So it's a challenge. Just the analogy that comes to mind, another Madison-based effort
Yeah.
that took off on the national level is the National Media Reform Movement.
Mm-hmm.
And in I think it was 2001 or 2, we had a gathering. They expected 200 people. They got over 2,000
Yep.
people from every corner of the country. And very quickly, they had to rethink what there was happening. And within a time, every year and a half, there would be another national gathering. It would get bigger and bigger. I mean, I'm anticipating that this is that kind of movement.
It is. That's it. About a couple of weeks ago, I received a phone call from Fort Atkinson group, and they have a new thing called Unity when they go to school and talk about it. So they approached us, and we start talking about, hey, can you come and talk about it? So we had some discussion, and I just simply asked a question. I said, we are pretty big in reaching out to white nationalists, to white supremacists.
Yeah.
Because maybe we can just sit down with them and explain certain things. Hopefully they will understand engagement bring people together. And I said, do you know some of these white nationalists? He said, oh, that's an interesting question. And actually, I do know one person who is right here in Fort Atkinson. I said, can we
Interesting.
meet? So we met on Saturday a couple weeks ago. And so I said, okay, what happened in your life? And all of a sudden, white nationalists working with us, promoting peace. What happened? And he says, interesting story. He said, I am really a white nationalist. I don't like all of these other people, to be honest. And I was in military. And I was working out there, and I was promoting white nationalism everywhere. And I said, okay, so what changed your life? He said, I was on a military mission. I was completely ambushed. And there was one guy who saved my life, who was African American. And that was the turning point in my life. And all of a sudden he said, look, I got to stop this.
So to be clear, this was someone who had been a white nationalist, who had seen the light through this experience.
Because of this experience,
Okay.
he changed his life, and now we are working together to go to schools in Fort Atkinson and the community. So I'm having meetings with them and discussion about how to organize for that area. And he is a good example, a real life story. So that's the kind of thing that we bring to people's attention.
You have alluded to Pardeep Singh Kalika, who
Yes.
is, again, on your advisory board, and Arno Michaelis, who are a partnership.
Yep.
We should probably just explain for someone who isn't aware of their backstory how they came together. So this week marks the 7th anniversary of the massacre at the Oak Creek Sikh Temple. And Pardeep's father was the head cleric there. 5 other people perished, as well as his father. Within a month or two, Arno had reached out to him. Arno's someone who had been a white supremacist, actually belonging to the very organization that had launched this attack.
Yep.
And Pardeep, in their book, The Gift of Our Wounds, just describes his trepidation at meeting with this gentleman, not knowing
Yep.
what to expect, his family very wary of putting him in possible danger, and yet he took that bold move.
Yes.
And wonderful things have come of it. Could you describe just a little bit what came out of that moment?
Yeah, I think it was interesting because when we were launching this organization, we were looking for some real life success stories as a part of our educational program. So I reached out to Pardeep and I said, hey, I would like to meet with you and Arno in the same restaurant in Milwaukee where you two guys met the first time.
Which was a Vietnamese restaurant.
It was a Thai restaurant.
Thai restaurant.
Because
Okay.
they both love hot food.
Uh-huh.
And they go there
can
2
see
or
that.
3 times a week. I was shocked. When we ordered the food, they finished the hot food, and I was not able to do that.
See, when
I'm
Pardeep
from
and I
India.
got together, we had Italian, so
Hey, it's all good food.
It's all good.
It's all good comfort food.
It's all of that kind of thing. So, I started asking questions. I say, hey, we launched this new initiative, a movement, and I'm here to listen to your story, what happened. So, Arno described, and he still feels so bad in his heart that his organization, the hate group, largest in the country, killed 6 people.
yeah.
He still feels that. And the only thing that happened in his life is that I asked him, I said, what changed your life? He said, people like you, people like Pardeep, people like from other communities, the way they were treating me, the way they were responding to me, those kinds of things actually changed my life completely. So when shooting took place, Pardeep actually, about few months, as you said, reached out to Arno, and obviously in his family said, you must be out of your mind. What are you talking about? This is the guy who killed 6 people, including your dad. And he said, nay, I need to sit down with this guy and find out why, and those kinds of things. So this conversation started. So as soon as I heard their story, I said, so what is it? Because of this, they came together and started an organization called Serve to Unite. And then they go to schools, locally, nationally, and even internationally, to talk about their story, which is so powerful. And I can tell you how powerful that is. The very first event that we did with Arno and Pardeep and one of our terrorists, it was December 10, 2017. 500 people showed up. And there were a lot of people asking questions. A month later, I get a phone call from Mount Horeb teacher. And she said, we need to talk. I said, okay, what's that? She said, I don't know whether you know this or not, but 2 of my high school students went to your event and they came with this flyer and they heard the story of Arno and Pardeep. And they said, that changed our life. And you guys have to come over here so that all 800 students can listen to the same message. So that's the kind of power of their story that is actually changing the lives of our youth. At the same time, we decided that those 2 students, actually we asked them to be on our advisory board. So we want to empower these youth so that they become the leader and start organizing these events all across the state in high schools.
Well, to back up to a basic place, what you're saying is implicit with the notion, well, it's in contrast to the notion that we are hopelessly divided as a country. We are
Yeah.
polarized into the groups that are more sympathetic to the white supremacist movement or are aligning with the current president and maybe not particularly blind to how these things align. And then those of us who are in the light, we hope. There's a group in the middle that we have to talk about too. But the group that I first mentioned, we've got to realize that people can change.
Yeah.
Representative John Lewis has a powerful story to tell of, I think, 50-some years after he had been beaten in Mississippi. One of the young men at the time, came forward and asked to meet with him. And he got down on his knees. He says, "There's no reason you have to do this, but I beg your forgiveness. This has not only had an impact on your life, but on mine as well." And John Lewis reached down, lifted him up, so he was no longer at his knees, and embraced him.
Yep.
And the two gentlemen talked for another 2 hours. But the way that John ends that story is this powerful message.
Yeah.
People can change.
Absolutely. I think that's where, and the change when you sit down with them, when you are engaged, you explain to them, because sometimes, mostly mainstream media, and we have been talking about all of these politicians, use that for some other purposes and created this whole environment of hate and fear and confusion, and that's causing a lot of problems. A lot of people in this country, I would say more than 95% of these people are peace-loving, peace-promoting people.
So I'm wondering, is this resonant with the second group that you're now incorporating and trying to change? Because so much of this
Yeah.
is about economic distress, and a group of people, mostly white folks, blaming people of color, immigrants, for their plight.
Yeah.
And how do we get at that?
So, obviously, as I said, in addition to our educational program, we just put together a nonpartisan policy agenda. The most important thing among all is that building the American dream. What we are seeing is that economic insecurity is really becoming a breeding ground for hate. And these people actually, hate groups use that to recruit people. People talk about unemployment rate of 3% in this country. And politicians use that to make a case everything is good. But the reality is that 40% of American people every day decide which bill they want to pay. Most of those are doing 2 or 3 jobs. So it's not working out for people on the ground here, what we're talking about. So what we really need to do as a part of that, we want to make sure that these kids from high school go to either 2-year associate degree or a 4-year associate degree. And we want to make sure that they do succeed in their life and get a job so they don't become the target for these hate groups. So one of the new initiatives that we just launched, we started a 501c3 nonprofit organization called Empowering a Student for Success. And we have
Sorry, one more time. Empowering
Students for Success.
Students for Success. Okay.
Yep. And we have put together an advisory board of people from university, from MATC, and all these other people that are involved. It's a nonpartisan group. We have people from Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce as well. What's unique about this model? And we have to think about this very differently. Number one is completely interest-free, and is targeting low and medium income families all across the state. So the number one is completely interest-free and is tied to jobs. What we saw in 2008, a lot of people graduated, but the economy went down, and then they couldn't find a job, so they started working on some restaurant and other places with $7 an hour, that kind of thing, so that they can start making the payment. So we don't want to take that kind of route. Well, we want to make sure that it's tied up to their jobs. Now, how to get the job? What really needs to be done? Based on our experience, we know there are a lot of people out there who really don't know what those opportunities exist. They even don't think about 2 years from now, 4 years from now. Single parents, no opportunities there in terms of what they can do. So we're putting together a list of mentors. So, and there is a criteria here, the 2 types. One is that these mentors are specialized in different fields. So for example, if you're a guy looking for a $30,000 loan and you want to become a mechanical engineer, we're going to ask that in the application. We're going to say, okay, here is your $30,000 check. And by the way, here is a mentor who agreed voluntarily to guide you over the next 2 to 4 years to make sure that you have good grades and your future is built. Not only that, but the list of mentors that we have will have a diverse background. So, for example, if you are a white guy looking for a 30,000 and you still want to become a mechanical engineer, most likely you're going to get somebody else who doesn't look like you.
And there's that same opportunity
same-
as that young white supremacist who had an African American reach out.
Exactly.
Stands.
So this way, not only they're getting the guidance, but they're building the relationship over the next 2 to 4 years, learning about each other. And by the way, we want to make sure that you are successful. So if you get a high GPA like 3.91 out of 4, your loan is completely forgiven.
Wow.
What we are asking them to do, become a mentor, because we want to educate them so they can get a better job and they start doing exactly what we are doing at a smaller scale. And then the money comes back and it's a sustainable model. So that's what we are focusing on as a model to actually change the life and build inclusive community.
Just as a future marker, I've just become involved in a mentoring program called Merlin Mentors. And it's primarily, I think, for creative folks who need to hook up with someone who knows how to make that sustainable. But we should talk about that, because
Yep.
that may be the kind
Absolutely.
of program that already exists that
Yep.
would be a bridge to some of what you're doing.
Your beard's too short to be Merlin.
Well, apparently Merlin didn't grow younger as he got older, so
Yeah,
maybe there's still hope for that.
Yeah,
I don't
there's
know,
still
something
hope.
like that.
Yeah,
Somewhere
another
in there.
20 years of growth.
Nino, I wanted to talk about your specific project, but I just want to make an invitation to those folks who are listening, either on the radio or the live stream, or on Facebook Live, and you can wave up there. If you would like to participate in our conversation, you can give us a call here on the studio line at 608-825-0930. We're just getting up and running with some of these interactive technologies. If you are listening on Facebook Live, you may have some comments, but best way to actually weigh in on the conversation is to send an instant message to me, John Quinlan, and I'll do my best to look for that and then invoke that question into the conversation. But you are listening to Community Conversations here on the Sun 103.5 FM out of Sun Prairie Media Center. So, Nino, you are as part of these larger groups of We Are Many United Against Hate. There's a very specific project that you're overseeing, and you have a task force, a committee that's working on it. Could you tell us about that?
Well, Masood's a great taskmaster. He
Yes.
knows how to delegate.
This is an important step
yeah,
in that
very important
organizational
step in
development.
leadership
Yeah.
skills. And because it's a volunteer organization, I mean, right now, and so we're looking at how do we build that infrastructure. But when we go from the January 2017 event to where we are today, we took the path of education. We did not want to develop policies yet until we really heard and analyzed what was going on. So we've given this a lot of thought, and so we really have put together, and it was consensus building.
Yeah.
And we have a very diverse group of individuals, and not just culturally diverse, religiously diverse, and even non-religious folks. And we looked at 4 major issues. One, and when we talk about rebuilding the American dream, all the numbers shows that, yeah, the unemployment rate is low, but many people working 1, 2, and maybe even 3 jobs.
Right.
You've seen this inequality of income and earnings completely go in the opposite
I want to
direction.
stop for just a second, just punctuate that, because this is my pet peeve. All the powers that be would tell you that this president is presiding over a marvelous economy in which all votes are lifted.
Only
things are
for the
going really
wealthy.
well.
Yeah.
Only for the wealthy.
And
And,
that's
if you
an
hold
important thing.
stock and you
It
can
is.
defer capital gains and do all this stuff, it's helping them. I mean, if you really, truly wanted to stimulate the economy, the $1.5 trillion tax cut that the Trump administration Republicans gave to big business, which all they did is buy back their stock, and some even laid off people. Had they cut the student loan debt in half, that money would have gone back into the economy.
Just one other indication of this from the conversation that we had in the studio here 2 or 3 weeks ago is if you look at the population you serve in your day job.
Sure, the elderly.
Elderly folks who had expected to be able to retire at age 65 can't do that anymore.
The 2008 crash devastated a whole lot of people. 35 million people became unemployed worldwide. And thank goodness that Paul Ryan's bill that would have privatized Social Security so people could put the money in with the Wall Street stock market did not pass. Had that occurred, people would have lost 60% of the retirement funds. So the good news is that didn't happen. The bad news is that this trickle-down economic, or what I would call, or what George Horatio Bush called voodoo economics, is not working. And it's been going on since the Reagan years. And so the people who are accumulating wealth are the one percenters. And, you know, it's not a cliche. The fact of the matter is earnings have been pretty much stagnant. The ones who are earning money are the profit-making corporations who, in fact, have a right to do that, but they also have a right to distribute that money to their employees. And here's the cultural shift.
And this shouldn't exist in the context of monopolies like
Yeah.
the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world.
Yeah,
And-
I mean, why should
Yep.
why should McDonald's report, you know, I don't know, something like $1.5 billion of earnings, but not pay them $15 an hour
just
for
a very
employees?
quick tangent. I was staying in Oak Brook, Illinois, which is the headquarters of McDonald's, and was in this hotel that was a shrine to McDonald's. They had a picture of Ronald McDonald looking down on low-income people in the inner city. And it was a little ironic, but at that moment in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article breaking that quarterly profits had gone down for McDonald's, and the reason was its employees could no longer afford to eat there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so there are all these conundrums, but just to punctuate one more time, and I'll let you get further into describing this particular project. Again, you know, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is not a reflection of how good the economy is for
No,
most
it's not.
people.
No,
Although
it's not.
right now it's faltering because of some
Of
really
course it is.
short-sighted
And-
things that
and it's going to
happen.
continue to crash over time because
But it is more how many people are working those second and third jobs, how many people who did have a sustainable income previously
Yep.
got laid off because of changes in industry, the automation of so many different industries, which is going to have a catastrophic effect moving forward. All of those things are not indicative of some kind of prospering economy that the mainstream media seems to think is part of the narrative about why people may go on and support Trump. We've really got to get the word out that no, for most of us, this is a very difficult, problematic economy. And we've got to find solutions that are outside the matrix of just maintaining the status quo.
yeah, and there's no silver bullet, but there's plenty of silver buckshot to proceed. But one of the biggest thing that really made a difference is when Arno talked with us, especially at the Mount Horeb event and the Monona Terrace event. He said what white nationalists and neo-Nazis and fascists do is they prey on people's economic insecurity.
Yeah.
So they go to you saying, that job that you could have gotten, that person did it, or that person did it, or that nationality did it. When in fact it was robotics that probably did it.
Right.
Or in fact a bad trade agreement did it. Or in fact that they're giving tax breaks to the wrong people. And who says that we have to, every time there is new technology, that we have to eliminate jobs? In European countries, they don't do that. Okay, even the state of Washington, what they do is they have transitional jobs to help people off of welfare to transitional jobs to living wage jobs. And so the question is, do we have the will and the leadership to move this forward? And we do. And it starts right back to the business schools. If you recall, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and you looked at Lee Iacocca, who transformed the auto industry, right? Was the whole question of we have a responsibility to our employees, our customers, and our shareholders.
We go back a ways. Henry Ford, who believed that
Oh,
his employees
absolutely.
ought to be able to purchase their own
Right,
cars.
and
that
that's
they
where he
made.
created
Yep.
the assembly line.
Right.
And so what you have, though, is you have this new mentality coming out of the Chicago University School of Business and Stanford and Harvard, maximize profit. In other words, drive wages down, maximize profit, and damn the torpedoes. And we got to turn that around.
So what you've got is people that are worried about the next quarterly profit statement, about the shareholders.
Sure.
And it's not that.
It's not about
it's-
maximizing profit.
and
It's
it-
penny wise and pound foolish when you do.
And the problem is if you're only concentrating on the next quarter rather than the bigger picture,
Yeah.
if you're only concentrating on your shareholders and not your employees and the loyalty that they will show, because that's going to affect your productivity and other things. If you don't have a loyal workforce that you're treating well, I mean, I have on my mother's side, my grandfather started a small corner grocery store that became a chain of supermarkets. Now, he was as conservative as you could come in terms of his political philosophy, but he understood that being good to his employees made so much sense. He had employees that worked for him for 30, 40, 50 years.
My mother and father, same thing in their
I was just thinking
Italian
with Amato's
business.
restaurant, yeah.
They were in business for 50 years, and I would say that they had employees who had tenure of 25, 35 years.
And I want to mention both your parents and my grandparents were conservative in the sense of being good business people, being frugal, being careful, because
they were part of the Depression babies.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they weren't good to the people who worked for them and with them.
Yeah, they saw value in putting. Well, we used to talk about human capital. And those are your employees. Those are your intelligent workforce, so on and so forth. And we've drifted away from that. And what we've also seen is big industry with a hidden conservative, ultra-conservative agenda going into universities, creating chairs, and developing a whole new curriculum and philosophy that maximize profits versus looking at the fact that we have a three-legged stool. You have shareholders' responsibilities, you have employee responsibilities, you have community responsibility. And over time, that has completely eroded. So by rebuilding the American dream, making it affordable, coming up with a living wage, those are the things that are going to stop the ability for white supremacists to go around and recruit people who are upset. But when you have somebody in the most powerful position in the world, which is in the White House, start targeting and labeling every Mexican as rapists and criminals and yada, 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 or Muslims that are out to destroy you, right? All that does is feed into this white supremacist neo-Nazi group, and now he's enabling them and almost to the point of encouraging them. And it is now an international movement because of the World Wide Web, and that is really scary. The other big issue, too, that we talk about, it's important to let people realize that we're a nation of immigrants. First of all, one could even argue we actually came to this country as illegal immigrants because we didn't have a visa by many of the Native American tribes who basically were here, okay? Putting that aside from a historical perspective, the fact of the matter, I teach at UW-Platteville in the Criminal Justice Department as well as in the Sustainability for Energy. And I ask my students things like, well, can you imagine if they had a Muslim ban back when Iran was falling apart and the Ayatollah was stepping in, and they wouldn't let even individuals into this country with political asylum? Well, Steve Jobs' parents were two of those people,
right.
And they came here, and look what Steve Jobs has contributed. What people don't realize, what has made this experiment called America so innovative is by bringing in people from the outside, educating them, or they come in with their own education. Takes a whole new perspective, and instead of stagnating with the same cultural group, we are constantly churning innovation, new ideas, entrepreneurship. But there are people who are using fear tactic, and fear stands for false evidence appearing real, to try to condemn those people, because see, it's easier to single them out. And then plus, it's a way to manipulate, and history shows that. We saw what happened in Nazi Germany, a man who gets elected and started to use the Jews as a whipping board. And then once he took care of the Jews, he went after the gypsies, and then the gays, and then the Catholics. And so you have somebody in the White House that, quite frankly, is in stage one of what we've seen historically, and it's pretty frightening.
So this conversation reminds me of conversations I've had with John Nichols, Matt Rothschild, some others about these economic theories. And I think it also resonates with, to a certain extent, the blacklisting era, the 50s, where anything that was seen as socialist was seen as, therefore, fitting into the matrix of the Cold War, other things. That is still a catchphrase that is being invoked, that we have to be careful, otherwise we will lose all of the wonderful things that come with the free market system and everything. But it's not a free market system in a lot of ways.
No, it's a rigged system right now.
Yeah,
That's the problem. And when you really talk about the free market system, we've been deregulating the free market system.
Deregulation is a key word here.
Which resulted in the 2000 crash.
Right.
And resulted in the 2008 crash, which could have been prevented. But nobody want to regulate Wall Street. So we've realized time and time again that what really gives credence to correct deregulation is when there's a technology there that can revolutionize. And I'll give you an example. The telecom industry, right? What do we used to have? A black phone, a beige phone, and if you're lucky, you could get a pink or a yellow phone, right?
Right.
Run by one company. And all of a sudden...
That's my other grandfather's story,
right?
by the way.
And instead of laying coaxial cable that's about 12 inches in diameter across the Atlantic Ocean or the Pacific Ocean, my goodness, we came up with satellite disk, and we came up with cell phones, and we came up with all sorts of different innovation, which changed the industry. So when you deregulated that, it was because the technology and prices went down. When you try to deregulate the energy business, look what Enron did. They gamed the system. When you try to deregulate the savings and loan business, you put these people out there who think they can become global billionaires, and they don't, and they screw the system. And you see it time and time again. The difference is when Ronald Reagan deregulated the savings and loan business, he went after those CEOs who abused their power, exploited their shareholders, exploited their communities, violated federal law, and put them in prison. Fortunately, we haven't seen that here yet.
Just a slight variation on that. So my grandfather, Quinlan, was a senior engineer at Western Electric, which is exactly the scenario you're talking about to a certain extent. But let's contrast Western Electric in the 1960s with Amazon today.
Mm-hmm.
Western Electric was a virtual monopoly as part of AT&T and other things, but it was extremely regulated, such that it had to act in the public interest. There is no such regulation of Amazon now.
No.
Amazon doesn't even pay taxes, for goodness sake.
Yep.
And I'm glad that Jeff Bezos runs the Washington Post and does lots of great things in other areas, but there is a social responsibility that is lacking. And talk about automation. Yeah, it's kind of neat maybe that drones will start delivering our packages, but not instead of people, or that customer service is going to be these endless automated systems to try to give you some kind of an answer, but people are really what you need in those circumstances. So there are a lot of trends that are happening, and we have to recognize, as convenient as it is to organize through Amazon, we've got to hold the Amazons of the world
accountable and transparent. And the real issue, too, is if you look at national security, we're constantly under cyber attack. Okay? So when people say, well, we're going to take all the truck drivers' jobs away who ship food across the country, fuel supplies, you name it, that is insane. Can you imagine if someone hacked into a system like that? So even though you have the technology, you still need a human behind that technology.
Yes.
When they created some of the most sophisticated nuclear power plants, if it wasn't for the people in those power plants at 3 Mile Island, we would have had a meltdown. Okay?
And you need to pay those humans more than $12 an hour.
That's right.
You need
That's
to somehow
a living wage.
A living wage is somehow going to bankrupt all these corporations or whatever. I'm sorry, but the living wage has not risen in all this time.
And look what's happened since post-World War II with the big boom, up until about the middle 80s. If you worked at my father and mother's restaurant as a waiter, waitress, bartender, starting the day after school ended in June and went back the day after Labor Day when school started, and worked during the summer, you could pay for room, board, tuition, books, athletic fees, gasoline, and have money left over for beer. If you made $10,000 a year in 1969, you had a great standard of living. Okay?
Yep.
But our ability and our wages have eroded terribly while the cost of everything has gone sky high.
Mm-hmm.
So that is out of whack. But if we were to actually look at the minimum wage and adjusted it for inflation and everything else, it'd be at $35 an hour. And all people are asking now is $15 to $18 an hour.
So Masood, for somebody who tuned in late in the show and is thinking, I thought these guys were going to talk about hate groups and white supremacism. What does this economic stuff have to do with any of that?
To do with
let's remind folks about why this is at the center of all this.
Because our organization is a problem-solving organization. We look at issues and we try to solve it. We believe strongly that economic insecurity is playing into this, becoming a breeding ground, as we said. So we are looking at and talking about all of these issues to create an economy that works for all of those people so that they don't become the victim.
Absolutely. Hey, I this is a bit of a tangent, but I want to emphasize one other thing about your organizational development. And this is one of the reasons why I'm bringing you into the studio. My academic work now is in archiving and capturing history, but I think it's very important as your organization grows and develops to capture the path that you took, so that others can replicate it and other things. So I hope you're taking careful notes as
Yes,
you go
we
along
are.
and doing other things. But that's one of the reasons why capturing your story in the media is so important, because it's another means of telling the story of how you got to where you're going.
And another component, too, is to promote religious freedom as well as religious tolerance. And when we talk about that, it really is religious freedom of religion and freedom from religion. Okay? And there's a fair balance. But now what you have is a far-right element coming from all these so-called think tanks that are saying, well, if I work for a bakery and don't want to have that wedding cake go to the same-sex couple.
This is an actual case that played out in
right,
Indiana.
and therefore my religious freedom is being violated, right? Because I shouldn't have to sell that. My goodness, if you went down that path, that means any religious group could say that. But that's being pushed to use that as a wedge to go after people who happen to be gay in their beliefs, happen to be of a different color in their beliefs. And this is an orchestrated effort by some right-wing groups in this country funded by the Koch brothers.
And it's turning the arguments on its head about
It
religious
is.
freedom.
It's absolutely turning the arguments on its head. So we're talking about religious tolerance and balance.
So what do you think you implied, but maybe didn't say it explicitly, is a lot of the argument is my religious freedom is being compromised because you're not believing and thinking exactly like I do.
You hit the nail on the head, John.
Yep.
Precisely. Yeah. And that's dangerous. Absolutely dangerous.
So the counter to that, and to bring Pardeep Singh Kalika into this again, he has an exciting new role over in Milwaukee as the head of an interfaith conference.
Yep.
And as best we could tell, I think, at least in terms of that organization, it's the first time that a non-Christian out of the 6 or 7 directors that have preceded him has headed up that group, which is exciting in and of itself.
Very exciting. Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about that.
But interfaith work and countering a narrative that has been co-opted by fairly extremist evangelicals, folks that, again, it's my way or the highway in their philosophy, it needs to be countered by more of a pluralistic view, an interfaith concept where we honor the traditions and the beliefs of other people.
Absolutely. And, you respect all religions, okay? But if you have to take up arms to get your point across against another religion, that's not religious freedom.
No.
If you have to condemn a segment of society, that's not religious freedom. So you may believe that abortion is not a good thing. You may believe that same-sex marriages may not be a good thing. Well, that's fine. If that's your belief, you have a right to that belief, but do not force it on others. Can you imagine if the Amish said, hey, we don't believe in automobiles, so we now want everyone to use horses and buggies? I mean, that's an extreme case, but that's what you're getting from some of the religious folks. And people like Rick Santorum, former Senator Rick Santorum, is pushing that agenda.
On CNN.
On CNN. And it's absolutely ludicrous.
Yeah. Let me just tell you a brief story. This time, April of last year, I was up in one of the small towns I grew up in, northern Wisconsin. And I have always wanted to be in dialogue with someone who is a Trump supporter or someone theory on the other side of things. So I innocently got into a conversation with the clerk. Well, it became very apparent she was part of a group that not only protests at Planned Parenthoods, but advocates hurting or killing people who are attending those institutions, certainly the doctors who were there. And so the conversation was going into a really dark place. I tried to pull out of it. She, at one point, when I tried to, somewhere early on, to find some common ground, started shouting at me and that I was not listening to her. I was just like all of those other people. She apparently went online and Googled me, found out I was gay, started attacking me. I left the place. I doubled back to tell the manager of it was an antique store, what was going on. She had me arrested, and the police essentially brutalized me for about an hour and a half because of what she had maintained was
What she lied about, sure.
What she lied about. And I don't tell that story lightly. It's taken a year and a half to the point where I can, where the stress that goes with it isn't there. But I'm now convinced, especially after last weekend's events, this is a very pervasive phenomenon. It's not only white supremacists, it's other folks who are such ardent advocates for a narrow ideological position that does not tolerate a difference of opinion, that this is a very widespread phenomenon in this country. There are a lot of women and men who are like this person, who are such so
Well-
virulent and dogmatic in their beliefs that they won't tolerate other people.
But see,
who
what's
disagree.
coming out of the White House is emboldening these people now to step forward and express their anger. Yeah, how many cases have you heard time and time again? I mean, the one that comes to mind right away is the African American family who were in a park using a barbecue, right? And the woman called the police and made up a story, and they came and arrested them.
Or the
okay?
situation in Pittsburgh in the coffee shop where
Same thing.
Oh yeah.
a couple of African Americans sit down
Yeah.
and didn't order right away, and therefore they
Yeah,
or
and they
used
brought the
restroom.
police in, and the police went
Yeah.
to. And let me say this about white supremacists: there is data out there that shows, and the FBI has it, where white supremacists have infiltrated local law enforcement. Now we have over 17,000 local law enforcement agencies throughout this country, and if we're really going to get arms around the crisis, we have to begin to do that kind of screening and monitoring what they're doing online, and make sure that we have educated, tolerant people who don't have a hidden ideological agenda, because now we're giving them the authority and the ability to kill, and that is really, really concerning.
So the point I was making earlier is, again, this is probably more widespread than we assume
Absolutely.
it does.
Yes.
And folks in the mainstream, and they don't have the backgrounds that the two of you do, or other things. I think we've known this all along. These folks are coming out of the woodwork, but
Yeah.
they were in the woodwork all along.
And they're emboldened. They've
No
taken
doubt.
off the hoods.
Right.
Right? And now they're public. Masood, share with John and the audience about the NBC special that was created. And there was a big program on Sunday that talked about white supremacists and the fact that a lot of the domestic terrorist cases are never reported.
Yeah.
They've been underreporting. So if you look at the rise of 500% hate crimes, and they're underreported,
Yeah.
but the
No, I think that's
NBC
true. I mean,
special-
NBC
yeah.
started this investigate TV series, and
Yeah.
they're starting about just like the way investigative journalists work. They started looking at this, and the first one that they're targeting is, this FBI investigation that they did, and a lot of those were not reported, and that's what we were asked to actually participate, in terms of what we're doing, literally. So, FBI is concerned about it, although they have not reported those kinds of cases. But at the same time, the good news is that these guys are coming out and sharing now their concern openly to say, we have the biggest threat. We need to make some changes, legislative changes, so we can start going after these people and do a better coordination of reporting. And that, to me, is a very positive step that these federal agencies are coming out and talking about this particular
Just
And,
to
and
put-
what's tragic
Yeah.
is that in the prior Congress, the 116th Congress, when the Republicans controlled both houses, Paul Ryan in the House, McConnell in the Senate, they actually cut funding to Homeland Security to do the research and do the monitoring of domestic terrorists. And what we're really seeing, this is a public health issue that is impacting the lives of children, impacting the lives of adults, and no one is safe anymore. And I think the accumulation of 2 mass shootings within 13 hours has really been I'm hoping, a turning point. But I don't expect anything coming out of Mitch McConnell. So the question becomes, we have to force the issue in the upcoming elections.
Well, I think in microcosm, the two cities' experiences, Paso, a chance for us to learn as a nation what immigrants have always faced, what people of Mexican descent have faced, including the history that goes back
Oh,
to
sure.
the annexation of that land, and all of the different ways that we have dehumanized Mexicans
Yep.
in our history. So there's a new awareness there, but in Dayton, it is one of those. But for the grace of God, go I moments. And anyone could be in an entertainment district. God forbid, I hate to even invoke this possibility, but this could have happened on State Street, for goodness sake.
Oh, sure.
And so if we realize that this does affect us directly and the people we care about, that's a breakthrough moment to a certain extent.
Well, let me just give you one example of you were talking about, how all of these things that we are seeing affecting locally. I have been in Madison for over 30 years. We have 3 mosques here, right? Okay.
And a Sikh temple in Middleton and other
Yeah, we
faiths.
have our own mosques here on the west side and downtown and on the east side as well. And when the month of fasting starts, obviously, it's for 30 days, and then we get in congregation every day at night between 10 and 12. We pray together and all that kind of stuff. In my 30 years, in Madison, we never had an armed guard outside the mosque when we are praying. Okay? Never happened. So that's where we are at in terms of people are so concerned about we will be next. And we need to do whatever we need to do to protect ourselves. That's not what this country is all about. I mean, this is just very scary moment that we are going through, unfortunately.
And I want to acknowledge the depth of all that you're expressing there. But I also want to put into play the way those of us who are lesbian, gay, bi, and trans feel right now. We have a picnic coming up, and again, God forbid that anything should happen. But there's also been a debate about whether the police should play a role in those things, and that's a very complicated issue, in and of itself, because of course of the abuses that some people have suffered in our communities. But the bottom line is, we need to be vigilant now. We need to understand that there are people, as you said, who have now come out of the woodwork. That we've got to be there for each other. We've got to make sure that people are protected and safe. That's the disturbing thing that came out of this weekend. People are no longer feeling comfortable and safe. And how do we get there? We get there by we are many coming together.
And who are the primary shooters here? White, young, males, Americans.
Yeah.
Timothy McVeigh, young, male, American, former military. I think he was in the Marines. And again, this is a constant pattern of behavior. So if you're going to condemn a segment of society, can you imagine if we did a racial profiling of all young white males in their 20s?
Sure.
But here's the real danger. Terrorism is used for purposes of destabilizing a democratic society. If you can create as much fear and give excuses for the government now to clamp down on any kind of freedoms, you've now created a potential civil war within that country. And so we can't live in fear, but we have to start changing the laws. So when a kid goes in to buy a beer and they're not 21, they can't buy a beer. But they can walk into a Walmart or any of the gun stores outside of Madison and buy a 100-round magazine and an SR-15 or an AR-47. That's just ridiculous.
And it really does come down to, the Second Amendment is always held up. I'm all for people being able to
regulated
purchase muskets.
Militia.
Yeah,
regulated
and they
militia.
can get muskets, but the Founding Fathers never had any suggestion of these weapons of war.
It's the same thing that you will be talking about. Okay, well, everybody in this country had the right to speak, freedom of speech, those kinds of things. Okay. All right, so they used that.
But we've also
as an
said they
argument.
don't have the right to scream out in a theater that there's a fire when there isn't one, or to use their speech to advocate for violence.
So one of the things that we're trying to do is to reach out to those people that the biggest thing that this country has a freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and all those kinds of things. Yes, but there is a difference between freedom of speech and hate speech.
Mm-hmm.
Freedom of speech actually builds the democracy that we are all after. The hate speech destroys it. And I think this is so important that we need to get out to say, okay, yes, you have it, but if somebody else has some other opinion, we need to respect them, we need to talk about it. But you don't cross that line between the freedom of speech and hate speech. That creates a lot of problems.
I'd like to get some folks from the ACLU in those chairs, and having served on that group. No, I mean, I think it's a really important issue, but it is this distinction. We're not saying that speech doesn't have consequence.
Yeah.
We are, of course, saying this should be a free marketplace of ideas, and even embracing a dialogue with someone who is still a white supremacist may still be an area where common ground can be found. We don't want to eliminate options for being able to put things on the table. Anti-racism workshops, one of the things we talk about is, yes, someone should be able to express what is probably a misconception or an ignorant thought, because that's the way we get it out in the open, we discuss things. So that's important. But thinking of fair housing implications, for example, when someone lies, uses their free speech to say, to a black person, that apartment is $300 more than what they say to a white person.
Yeah.
That's speech that has consequence. And the
Absolutely.
First Amendment doesn't protect that.
Yeah.
Obviously, and we also believe that probably the First Amendment shouldn't protect a corporation that wants to use the First Amendment as a shield to hide
To
behind.
discriminate.
And
To
you know, the
discriminate, yeah.
Citizens United
Well,
group.
Yeah, and here you have a situation where, quite frankly, we need to apply the same standards that they do with White House security. And what you have there is, if anyone went on the air and said, I want so-and-so shot,
Right.
Okay? Boy, I tell you, the FBI and Homeland Security would be right there at their door. So it's one thing to say, I don't like this policy, I don't like this, but the moment you cross that line where you're advocating for violence, that's where you no longer have freedom of speech.
People know that they can't joke about violent acts or other things.
Absolutely.
In the line of the TSA.
Absolutely.
And so this follows off of that.
And then
Yeah.
there is the silent condolence. So,
Right.
for instance, when Trump had his big rally, and he was talking about the invasion of these people coming across
And
the
they're
border.
chanting, "Send
and
her
everything.
back, send her back."
No, actually,
Oh.
they were chanting, "Shoot them."
Yeah.
Shoot them. And he did not stop them.
Mm-hmm.
He paused, he got a grin on his face, and he went on speaking.
And he said, well, this is what happens in the panhandle of Florida. Ha,
Right,
ha, ha, ha.
right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And so that is what's emboldening these people.
Right.
One of the things, I think we need to keep emphasizing. Okay, so what should we do next? That's the question we need to ask. We started out with the shooting and all that kind of stuff. I think our community here at large has a major role to play, right? A lot of people okay, so I came to this country, as I said, 35 years ago from India. And I've been in many, many countries, either working or talking to people, living or whatever that is. One of the things sometimes, people who are born in this country and they have never been to any other country outside United States,
Yep.
they really may or may not realize what America is.
For me, it was in part my trip to India for 6 weeks to understand.
See,
And, yeah.
yeah, exactly, and we don't want to lose that. We don't want to lose that how this country is perceived in terms of its value. This country promotes freedom of speech, freedom of religion, diversity is our strength, not weakness. Those kinds of things, innovation that Nino talked about, all of those things really make this country very unique. And that's the reason why people come here and don't go otherwise. So all of us have to really work together to make sure that this country remains the model for other countries to follow. But everybody has to work together to make it happen.
In fairness to India, I want to just explain why that 6 weeks in India was so important. First of all, it was an appreciation for the pluralistic expression of all the cultures and languages and religions of India. I think, as the world's largest democracy, sometimes we forget that on most days that all works amazingly well.
Yeah.
And that people, Amita Paul was on
Yep.
in this book, Islam Means Peace,
Yep.
as a man of Hindu tradition and his family, talking about celebrating Ramadan with his neighbors
Yep.
across the way. More often than not, Hindu and Islamic folks get along well and integrate in well. So India has those examples. But I think of the government who's currently in control right now,
Yeah.
that is promoting Hindu nationalism and taking over Kashmir and
See
doing all
what
the other
happened?
things.
Yeah.
So it's a worldwide phenomenon. We have lessons to learn in many different places, but we come back to who holds up as the highest standard this appreciation for diversity, for immigrant traditions. It is this country.
Yeah.
And we need to be distressed if that is sliding backwards.
I was at a press conference yesterday here at the Capitol, and one guy came to me and he said, I was pretty impressed based on the comments that you made, and you came from India and how you are involved into and building those kinds of things. And then he started getting into all of those details about, and I said, look, every single word that comes out the White House has some consequences worldwide. So the person who is in charge has to be very careful about what we do, because we are the supreme power, basically.
You mean you can't just tweet off at
You
3 in
just
the morning,
can't.
whatever you're feeling on the
you just
surface
can't.
of your...
And
Yeah.
then you do one, and You just can't do that. I mean,
Right.
that's the way people look at it. I was talking to a guy the other day, and I was just helping him with his student loan app. Hey, where is your high school kid going, and all that kind of stuff. And because we are concerned if they are not going for higher education, and if they have a little bit of something against a minority, that's the problem. So I'm going actually individually and talking to these people, and I asked, his dad was sitting, and I said, so he was listening about my story and all that kind of thing, and then he spoke a little bit after that, and he said, let's talk about this a little bit. And he said that, I am from one of those countries that were part of Russia before, so my parents are still there. And he said, let me tell you, I was planning to go and visit them, but right now I'm not. And I said, why is that? He said, because of what Donald Trump is doing.
Yeah.
The way he's treating those people and saying certain things. I am so reluctant to go there. And if this question is going to be asked, what's going on, I will not have the answer to that. And yesterday, I was in a meeting in Baraboo, and I met this guy again. We were just talking about it. And he said, hey, wow, this is getting even worse than a couple weeks ago that we talked about it. And he said, I am seriously thinking about leaving this country. This is the person who is born in this country, and just in the last 2.5 to 3 years, that's his view about what this country is doing.
A lot of us joke about going to Canada. I mean, my ancestors came from Europe through Canada, and part of me wants to think that's maybe where I belong now, because on many days it seems like
there lies a danger.
There does.
I will say this: the good news is that the checks and balances that our founding mothers and fathers put in place have upheld relatively well. But I do not believe those institutions can sustain another 4 years of Donald Trump.
No.
Because he has no respect for the rule of law. He has no respect for the division of power between Congress and the White House. He has stacked the Supreme Court, and he has stacked a lot of the judicial courts that are throughout the United States. So the key really is if you don't like what's going on, regardless of your partisan politics, if you believe in the American values and the constitutional ideals, and that this country is built upon immigration and the value of that economically, you have to vote these people out of office.
And it's a brief, fleeting thought. And
I
think I think where Canada figures in. There was a statement made right after, probably about the time that you were having that gathering at Monona Terrace, a group of Canadians that said, I know you guys are worried about what's happening.
Yeah.
You're worried about where this is going.
Sure.
Know how much we believe in you. We are your little brothers looking at things from one step removed. We have confidence in you because you've gone through all kinds of other travails and challenges. You've always come out the other side, invoking the ideals of what your country is all about. We need to remember that. The other thing is, all the folks that when our Governor Walker was rolling back workers' rights and doing those other things, there were some folks who had moved into Wisconsin to attend the university who were saying, I'm going back to New York now, or I'm going back to where I came from.
But you never heard that before.
No. I mean, as if it hadn't come up before. But I was just trying to say, no, let's stay here.
Yeah.
Let's do something. Because this is also a state in which is it's a state of both Joe McCarthy, but also Gaylord Nelson. And so let's invoke what can happen when we bring a Gaylord Nelson.
I can give you an example of my own family members, my niece and nephews. When I go and talk with them, how great this country is for higher education, you need to come. So I did all the work, and they were accepted. All three were accepted to come here for higher education. And then they call, and they say, Uncle, we need to talk. And I said, what's up? They said, Uncle, you talk a lot about America, education, opportunities, freedom. Do you still want us to come to the United States? You know what my response was? I need you more here now
than ever.
Than before, because we are fighting. Now think about this the other way too. We talked about Canada. How other countries are dealing with this rising hate. Well, think about what happened in New Zealand.
Yeah. Which is an amazing
What
story.
was the response? What laws were changed, right? Think about what happened in
so
Canada.
gun laws invoked, but also
Right.
a moral leadership. And
Leadership.
Careful in terms of the woman who's prime minister there.
Yeah.
That she was amazingly thoughtful about what she had to say, the lessons she
Compassionate,
extracted.
and they took
compassionate.
immediate action.
Yeah.
And let me just say, there are no safe havens to run to. I was shocked with
Right.
the Christchurch shooting because New Zealand is an island nation, is one of the most peaceful, loving nation you can imagine, okay?
Well, it's like in El Paso. It was targeted for those very reasons.
But here is, again, they're spreading fear. And there was the internet, and the fellow came from Australia, and he basically praised Donald Trump on his Facebook page. And so he went there to shoot up that church.
So to put it explicitly, the internet danger here
Yeah.
is that for a time, this coming out of the woodwork phenomenon has been spurred on by the internet and the Southern Poverty Law
It's spurred
Center.
on by the White House.
It
But
has been recently.
It's now connected globally.
But the Southern Poverty Law Center will track the rise of these groups in the ways that it have happened.
Bingo.
Because people who were individuals who were isolated, who had these fringe ideas, who were espousing in very dysfunctional, almost pathological ways how they were getting trampled upon. So therefore, they needed to lash out. Previous to this, that kind of person would exist in isolation. Kind of the words would trail into the ether. Now they go on to these bulletin boards, like this is an 8chan board where the El Paso shooter was weighing in and getting reinforced, and where we think there might even been a connection with the person in Dayton. They're being reinforced, and they're forming, in the worst sense of the word, a place of community where they support and reinforce each other. That wasn't necessarily happening in the pre-internet days.
Yeah, they're not isolated cases. They are all linked together now.
They're all linked together. The other country that we just talked about, Canada, okay?
Sure.
What did they do about a couple of weeks ago? They said, okay, guys, listen, this is what we're going to do. They took all of those white supremacist neo-Nazis group and they put them into the category of terrorist organization.
Right. Sure.
And we should put the KKK and a lot of these white supremacist groups on the international terrorist watch list. Plain and simple. You can track their behavior. They can say what they want. The fact of the matter is they are terrorist groups. And, there's a side of me that says, okay, you can monitor and track these people on the internet. But the moment they start advocating for specific violence, that's when you have to call their bluff and
Absolutely.
call them terrorists.
You guys, I need to check in with you because I can either put in a tape that's going to go for about a half an hour, or we can continue our discussion for a little while longer. What are your constraints
We got
today?
10 more minutes.
About 10 more minutes
Yeah.
to the bottom of the hour.
Yeah,
Okay,
and then
sure.
Okay.
Well, let's try to summarize again some of what we've described so far. Some of the threads are that economic justice is intricately entwined in what we're talking about here. I think the fascinating part of this discussion that maybe we haven't had a chance to explore past discussions is that we are, on some level, concerned about those potential perpetrators. We want to create a culture that runs counter to narratives in which young, in this case, a white, we're obviously not trying to paint with a broad brush about all
No.
young white men.
No.
But on the other hand, there are a substantial subgroup of those folks who are in that position that are probably going to vote for a reactionary candidate, that are going to be invoked notions of fear. They're going to show up at these rallies and chant. There's another substantial number that are going to be in the wishy-washy middle that aren't going to weigh in as all of this happens because they don't have an appreciation for what this means and how it hurts them if somehow they think that they're being held up to blame immigrants, blame the other for everything that's happening. We've really got to, at a fundamental level, restructure our society, use moments like this as educable moments. We got to take the Baraboo experience and kind of and spread it everywhere. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it is. And, I think this is very important because one person or one individual cannot do all of that because the problem is much bigger. So I think to me, the most important thing is the role that community at large can play into it, because this is a moment in this country where if we don't come together and address it, regardless whether you are a Republican or you're a Democrat or independent, it does not matter. But if you don't come forward, if we don't work together, we have a problem of losing what we call America, a dream country for everybody. And that's what we are worried about. Is
Sure.
that so? I think we are asking our individuals, community people, to start reaching out to their elected officials in their communities, start dialogues in their communities, ask us to come and debate these issues in a bipartisan way, because our organization is nonpartisan. We want to address and solve those issues, and it's very critical that we need to engage them
You can pull a chair.
into those kinds of conversation, which is very, very critical. So even it's very challenging right now that if you talk to legislators to say, hey, the first thing you got to do is, if anything happens, you need to make sure.
We have a studio audience coming in, but please go ahead.
Okay, so one other thing that they need to do is, at least whenever such incident happen, both parties' leaders should come right away and start condemning it, regardless of who the shooter is. And I think that's very important to send a message that we will not tolerate these kinds of activities. And then we just talk about, this white nationalist group, we have to put them in that kind of domestic terrorist list and all those kinds of things, so the FBI can do whatever they want to do. But I think engaging these communities and working together and bringing these issues up to everybody's attention and debate and come to some kind of consensus, because the time is now.
And the worst thing that could happen is people who remain silent. They may not like what's going on, but they're afraid to speak up. They have to speak up.
Yeah.
And
Silence.
how do we create a place
Well-
where they can feel safe and comfortable in doing so?
Well, I don't think so much about being safe and comfortable as it is now. People are realizing that if we don't speak up, we're going to see more of this. So I'm hoping, I thought Sandy Hook massacre was the turning point, but there's something about this next time around in 13 hours, 2 shootings that may in fact be linked, that is going to put pressure on. Nothing's going to come out of Mitch McConnell's Senate chambers, okay? But I think this could be a huge turning point leading up to the 2020 elections. And we have to make a difference. And let me give you some stats. When you ask about background checks, there was a poll that was taken in Wisconsin. How many of you like beer? 67% said beer. How many of you like background checks? 77% said background checks. Now, this is the state that elected Scott Walker 3 times. In 2010, the recall, and then again until he was defeated by Tony. But the fact of the matter is, the populace is behind it. So the question becomes, who's holding up the crisis? And it's money, it's the NRA. NRA is getting money from the old Russians. And the fact of the matter is, the Mueller report in the second volume makes it very clear that the Russians are attacking us with cybers, misinformation campaigns, division, and strife. And they did that in the Ukraine. They try to do it in the French elections. So things just don't happen. And there is planned attempts to try to completely destabilize our democratic society.
So I know you've made this linkage to a certain extent already, but so we've already talked about the need to link to organizations and folks who are working on economic justice. But I think the democracy campaign, so essentially what Wisconsin Democracy Campaign does, what Mike McCabe has been doing. Mike McCabe, who is on your advisory board.
Yeah, and Dale Schultz, Republican, 33 years in the state Senate.
Where I think we run into problems is people saying, well, we failed after Sandy Hook because the people just gave up, or they were disheartened, or they whatever. But I don't think that happened.
No. In fact, the
it's
2018
a broken system that's the problem.
2018 midterm election showed, because there's Mothers for Action, which came out of the Sandy Hook massacre, are out there now organizing, finding candidates, and getting people engaged, and registering new voters who had given up on the system and now coming back in. So we've got to maintain that momentum. In regards to United Against Hate, the education component, love Trump hates, no pun intended, that has made a huge difference. But now we're looking at advancing the public policy components, which I think are absolutely essential. Educating people, want to talk with the news media, and want to get out in the communities and have this kind of discussion and good civil discourse.
When I use a term like fundamental restructuring of society, I know that sounds awfully scary to people, but it is essentially returning to values that we've had. It is rediscovering, again, the reason why this country exists, these proud traditions of immigrant building our country, of embracing diversity, of not thinking so much it was a melting pot, but a glorious salad composed of all these
A mosaic.
or
A
a
mosaic.
masala.
Masala.
Yeah.
Is I think the best metaphor. But yes,
Well, the other thing is that we are educating through our nonpartisan policy agenda as well. You talked about how we're going to make a change. Well, you can make a change. That's America, okay?
Yeah.
But you have to understand the way American system is set up, right? So these politicians, I don't care who they are, they pay attention to where they're from, okay?
Yeah.
So it becomes our responsibility in that particular constituency to start talking about those issues and start reaching out to those people. One of the things that we have not done historically that we are promoting within our group of advisory board is very diverse. We have people from all sorts of religion and no religion. That if I am a Muslim and I'm actually having Muslim issues, I always go back and talk to legislators and talk about my Muslim issues. Well, Jewish community, if they have their problem, they just go and talk about that, and so as other communities as well. One of the things that we are promoting as we are organizing events around nonpartisan policy agenda is telling these people of minorities and other groups to come out of your silos. Because if Jewish community issues become Muslim issues, and if we are the one talking to legislator on their behalf, is going to make a huge difference. So we're mobilizing all of those community to say, come out of this, work with us, and we can make a change. Think about it. More than 90% people are
Uniting against hate, and that's precisely the mission here.
as we close out, it's implicit in everything you're saying, but just a minute each, if you could. We'll start with Nino and then Masood. Are you hopeful that we can achieve something with all of this? That we can change?
Cautiously, optimistically hopeful. And I say that because you mentioned it earlier, John, that we've been here before, okay, in many different ways. 100 years ago, the political corruption in this country was horrendous. But then the populace, and they didn't have the internet, had turned it around. But the biggest danger is silence. So if you're mad, if you're upset, don't leave for Canada. Don't bury your head in the sand. Get out and be vocal. Join our organization. And it's a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization with Republicans and Democrats and religious faiths and non-religious groups who, in fact, want to maintain these freedoms and our immigration policies that have strengthened this country economically and, quite frankly, has added a great deal of value to the social fabric of this country.
For those of you wanting to find out more, the website is united-against-hate.org. We are many, united against hate. Your last thoughts, Masood?
Yeah, I said it many times, I'm going to say it again. Despite all of these things that we are seeing nationally, America is still the best country on the face of this earth to practice your religion and fulfill your dream. And the only way we'll keep going this way moving forward, that we all need to work together to make sure that this country remains the model for other countries to follow. I am very optimistic that together we will be successful.
Thank you both. Masood Akhtar and Nino Amato are here again from We Are Many, United Against Hate. These are ongoing discussions we hope to have. We thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting us. I appreciate it.
All right.